I'm calling you with a background in Brazil, but I'm actually in Lagos, where I've been for the last 7 years trying to tackle, I think, the hardest market for pharmaceutical product movement. But I'm super excited about this topic because we realized very early on that financing and access to finance was super key in making sure that quality and quality medications were being dispensed to the people. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vivian. Happy to have you here. Joshua, please go ahead.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Joshua Haynes. I'm the founder and managing partner of Masawa, the Mental Wellness Impact Fund. We invest in startup companies around the world that are focusing on catalyzing mental wellness, not just through and by deploying capital, but by also nurturing the capital, ensuring that the individuals and the organizations in our portfolio are also resilient and have good mental health so that they can get to the next funding round, have the impact that they need to have. I previously was at USAID for a number of years where I looked at the intersection of technology, civil society, and human rights, and also ran the internet freedom and internet governance area of the agency. So this is a great, exciting moment for me to be here as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joshua, and welcome all of you and all of you who are watching from everywhere in the world. Let me start the process by asking Derek a couple of questions. Derek, how is the WHO working to build awareness and digital transformation across Africa? Can you speak to the role of identification in promoting digital health initiatives? What resources and tools are available for public and private players looking to improve the health systems in terms of electronic medicine? And how has COVID changed the way that African governments approach digitalization as it relates to health services? Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Betty. It's indeed a mouthful question. And so I'll try to sort of like create... Yeah, I'll try and create an inspirational response. So first of all, thank you for having me at this particular panel. Really pleased to be able to share some of our work. I want to start off, Betty, by saying that as an organization, we have been on this agenda of introducing ICTs in health since 2005, and several actions have taken place since that year. In 2005, WHO received a mandate from its member states to introduce ICTs in health. So that particular year, in as far as digitalization is concerned, is a landmark. And since 2005, we've had 3 surveys to monitor the progress of ICTs. We've developed 2 kits in 2013 that have been quite transformational in enabling African member states and other member states to produce global strategies. At the time of measurement of the last survey on e-health in 2015, 58% of our member states had created digital strategies globally, and I'm referring to responding member states. And about 29 African countries in the same survey of 2015 had created at least one national e-health strategy. And the e-health strategies really are our entry point in terms of digital transformation or e-health transformation. African member states have progressively harnessed the power of digitalization. Recently, our member states provided for us a resolution on digital health, and this was in 2018. And the idea of digital health is really to embrace emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, augmented reality, all these emerging trends. And so that resolution led to the creation of our global strategy on digital health that was approved last year by our member states. And this global strategy is really our blueprint to support our regions, including the African region, on the path of digital transformation. We're focused on 4 areas in that resolution. First is skills transfer. How do we ensure countries are able to harness especially emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, and others? And then secondly is the idea of strengthening the approach of having a strategy at the country level that both the private and public sector can feed into to ensure cohesion and scalability. And then third is making sure that the government is in a driving seat, making sure that the industry is regulated, there's a working environment for all actors, including the private sector. And fourthly is the idea of patient centricity. How do we ensure that we're putting people first and fast-tracking universal health coverage, promoting patient rights, and making sure that we're not leaving anyone behind. As the saying goes, when we say leave no one behind, we also say leave no one offline. So these 4 objectives are quite key for us in terms of making sure that we're reaching people where they are. There are a number of products we've released, and these products really are intended at making sure that the private sector, the public sector are harnessing the power of digital. And as you've mentioned, Betty, COVID has sort of like amplified the importance of this area because, previously solutions like telemedicine, for example, were seen as, solutions for people that have no access, no means to go to a public facility. And these solutions were neglected. But with COVID-19 and the lockdowns that are coming up, we're seeing more and more adoption of telemedicine and telehealth. And so to ensure that such programs are expanding, we have created a number of repositories, such as a Digital Health Atlas, which is a home of digital solutions, and a number of guides which are available on our website to ensure that people, rather partners, are supporting the transformation in a manner that is cohesive, in a manner that is coordinated. And so most of these guides exist on our websites, the eHealth Toolkit, our digital implementation and investment guide, our digital adaptation kits. So really the aim of the organization is to take advantage of the current unfortunate pandemic to really leapfrog our digital transformation and making sure that we have a future-proof ready health workforce that is able to use digital tools. And so really I'm speaking towards digital literacy at this particular point. So in a nutshell, Betty, we see that there is an opportunity for us to transform the health sector using digital. We know that the future is going to be largely influenced by digital modalities, and that's why digital health is an important entry point for improving health systems on our side. Thank you so much, Betty, for this airtime. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Derek. And it's very interesting to see how we all think of COVID as being incredibly negative, but in fact, it's had really positive impacts in terms of multinational coordination. So thanks for that. And Vivian, from the other side, looking from the private sector, here's a few questions for you. What role has technology played in the procurement of vaccines during the pandemic in Africa? And how can digital technology and finance incentivize transparency in the health sphere in Africa? Similar to your insights, how are emerging market healthcare supply chains being disrupted by digital tech or maybe built?
Yes, so definitely the story of COVID-19 has kind of tracked with the story of what MedZep has been trying to bring to the market since 2017. We knew that having a platform that created transparency on the needs, the demand of hospitals, pharmacies, clinics, and patients, as well as helped pharmaceutical companies understand what's necessary, what's needed from them, what medications are needed, and the fact that MedZep has been involved in facilitating that movement since 2017 was only amplified by COVID-19. So we've always sold medications, every medication that a hospital or clinic or pharmacy might need. We've always had vaccines. We've always moved vaccines across the country. And so what happened with COVID-19 is that it allowed stakeholders who were resistant to using a platform to purchase and manage their medications. It pushed them and gave them the courage and also the tools to start to understand how they could actually use MedZep way more efficiently. And so what we saw is our traditional hub, which is in Lagos, we saw ourselves able to expand across the country without having to actually set up physical facilities in various states, which was the original plan. So from a MedZep perspective, that's what we've seen from the industry. From a vaccine perspective, and I guess maybe we want to talk about COVID-19, et cetera. Nigeria has done a pretty good job of creating, using technology to create transparency around the appointment booking and organizing the movement of people to actually get their vaccines, and that was definitely a great development, right? You now see typically countries that are used to doing things completely offline, adopt and embrace technology. So what I would say is definitely that COVID-19 has just kind of been that great amplification and has disrupted the way that people think around how they should be handling their medications, how they should be, thinking about where they get their medications. We started the company in 2017 to tackle the fake and substandard medication problem. And when I first started, many of our hospitals and clinics stated that it wasn't really important to them. Quality wasn't necessarily the most important thing to them. It was the price of the medications. But what happens when you use a transparent platform, when you use a platform or technology, you create transparency, right? So now we know where this medication came from, and you can start to onboard suppliers or sources of medications in a much more standardized way that improves quality from the beginning. And then, of course, you're creating technology creates transparency throughout the entire movement of that medication. So even if the individual hospital owner or doctor isn't so concerned about quality, the end result is that quality does start to improve when you adopt a technology. So, or when you adopt a technology solution for your healthcare, for healthcare in general. So I believe that it has been a disruptor in people's minds, not necessarily that there were new technologies that have to be created or anything that hasn't existed before. It just pushed what is already existing to the forefront of a solution that is plausible for in the African context.
That's great, Vivian. It's sort of like, instead of having an aha moment, you have an aha period, where people constantly waking up and saying, oh, this is what's possible. This is what's possible. So Joshua,
Exactly.
Thanks, Vivian. So Joshua, let me ask you now a few questions. How has the pandemic affected the way that mental wellness is treated? What role has digitization played in this transformation? What are some ways that digital technology has responded to the health crisis, both from front-end delivery of services and its ability to provide back-end analytics and data to figure out what's really going on? And how is there a way that you can draw any connection between the mental well-being and mindfulness effect, and how they affect financial inclusion and decision-making?
Yeah.
And what's particularly Masawa's approach? Sorry, this is a lot of questions. What is Masawa's approach particularly to communicating the financial returns on mental wellness investments? Is this different from emerging markets versus more developed markets? Okay. Go ahead, dive in.
Thanks for the easy question. I appreciate it. Yes to all the above. I think it's important to frame why mental wellness specifically, or mental health, is important in the context, given the COVID-19 pandemic. Essentially, many people don't realize that the largest disability in the world actually is depression. Those are data that the WHO puts out. And actually in Africa specifically, more than 18 million life years are lost every year because of issues related to mental health problems. But on the flip side, mental health specifically is an incredibly stigmatized topic, where many families feel the need to hide family members who might have anything from schizophrenia, anxiety, depression, all the way to simply languishing. And so also on the African continent, there is a dearth of trained providers for mental health services. In some countries like Guinea-Bissau, there are 0 psychiatrists in the entire country. And in other countries, South Africa or Kenya, for example, there are more psychologists than psychiatrists available for the more clinical areas, but it still is woefully low. So what has the pandemic done? Well, like the rest of the world, because more people have experienced the issues of loneliness, stress, fear, anxiety because of a potential loss of economic outcomes, because of loss of life, because of freedom of movement issues. People have been able to talk about it a little bit more, which of course is a very important topic for this. But what we are seeing specifically is that there has been an increase in the number of organizations that are saying, okay, if the government isn't able to provide mental health services, both treatment and prevention, then we're going to create services on our own. So we're seeing in a number of countries, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, Rwanda, where startup, for-profit social enterprises are coming together to start creating the linkages, the teletherapy specific linkages for mental health providers to be able to do therapy at the first instance and diagnosis digitally. Now, in telehealth writ large, as Derek was saying, that it has increased tremendously up to, I've seen some stats of 175 times what it was before the pandemic. And so we're probably not going back from there. But there's also this dearth of ensuring that that ecosystem is there and that the financial aspects that providers are able to receive payments digitally or not is really possible. So the question around what does a lack of mental health do for the financial situation, especially for those at the bottom of the pyramid, we know that when people are in situations of fear and anxiety about where their next meal is going to come from, they often make decisions, rash decisions that they wouldn't make otherwise. And so that's this huge correlation between mental illness and socioeconomic status is very prevalent. Then when we look at specifically the rise of technology and digital phones, 4G across the continent, there's still a lack of really proven evidence of ensuring that a lot of the new things that are coming out and approaches for mental health are backed by science and backed by evidence. So there's that issue. Another issue with the increasing time spent on your phone, because you have a phone, and probably all of us have this problem too, is that especially for youth, now 50% of mental illness happens before you're 15 years old. So this previous year and a half of youth spending so much time online, whether it be on Snapchat, TikTok, or Instagram, is really deleterious to the effects of one's self-worth, self-being, increases the fear of missing out because all of your friends are showing on Instagram all their amazing lives that they're having. Of course, everyone is having issues, but that is a really cause for concern for long-term effects of this virus and what that has to do. And where individuals are retreating into their digital worlds and not being able to use the communities that have been long forged in their various environs to help support as one would normally in a normal situation. As an investment fund, the question around how we communicate, well, yes, there's a financial incentive to invest in organizations that are increasing mental wellness, absolutely. But for us, it's not just about the absolute return on investment. It is equally important that we are able to measure and be held accountable to increasing people's self-perception of their own wellness and their ability to live fulfilled lives. On the financing side, I think a lot of times we think about how, for those at the bottom of the pyramid, how digitization can help increase those who are unbanked or underbanked. There's also a huge swath in the middle, especially around how are financing opportunities going to companies and private sector entities to be able to get the capital that they need to have the greatest impacts possible. So there are a couple of topics I think are also really important to connect. So thank you for those 686 questions, and I hope that I answered them all somewhat okay. Thank you.
Effectively and with short period of time as well. So now I have a question for all of you. I have a series of questions, and I would appreciate if you would just choose one and decide which ones you want to answer and then answer. So can you offer some examples of how digitization or digital health has impacted financial inclusion? And what about the reverse? Does financial inclusion impact the delivery of health services? And what are some digital health success stories that you can tell from various parts of Africa? The stories are important to us. So please, if you've got one, please tell us the story. How can the public and private sector, and I know you have one, at least one, Vivian. How can I've got two more questions. How can the public and private sector better collaborate to push forward digital health and finance? And finally, what are the roles of digital finance stakeholders play, both public and private sector, in promoting digital health? So what's my job in helping you to do yours? Thanks. Pick one. Vivian, you're excited about your story, so let's hear it.
Yeah, because when I first started MedZef, I didn't realize that we would also have to think about how to create a financing institution, right? But that's actually what ended up happening. So there's in Nigeria, for example, you have what are open drug markets, right? There are these places where people congregate, and it's easier for all the various importers and all the people who sell medications to congregate into this one little location so that they can sell their medications as quickly as possible. And in these places, you will find the cheapest medications possible, right? And so in 2016, before I started MedZef, I went and surveyed all of the hospitals in Lagos to find out where they're getting their medications. And everyone kept directing me to this open drug market. And I went there. It's dirty. It's a market, right? And so, there's no consistency in the quality of the handling of medications from distributor to distributor. And so that's what I found on ground when I started MedZef. And so then when you kind of roll a bit deeper into, okay, well, what is the issues that driving people to these open drug markets? I would sit down and talk to hospital owners, and you would find that, they are actually dealing with a lot of the struggles of actually building a company, right? They are, a majority of hospital and clinics are owned by single owners. They don't have support, and they're dealing with the challenges of being entrepreneurs. So, there's many areas of leakages throughout their organization. And one of their biggest pain points was the fact that they would get these emergency calls from their staff saying, we need to buy these medications, and I need, this X amount of money to run to the market and go and get these medications, right? And so, that's what I found on the ground. But when I started to, when I realized that, okay, this is partly a financial issue. They're dealing with working capital issues. They can't get financing from the bank. We will make sure that part of our business model is financing the medication purchases and giving them a really easy way to pay back, but then also plugging in other financing companies to help with the working capital challenges, and that we would create this platform to allow other entities to also help finance. We've seen hospitals that could barely afford a couple $100s worth of medications, that as we gave them access to working capital through the financing of their medications, but also created a transparency around their medications so that they could start to, reduce costs. They could start to plan. They could even use these documents to go to the bank and get even better loans. We've seen these many of our hospitals have grown from very, very tiny clinics or small or not functioning so well hospitals to hospitals that are growing. They're buying up other hospitals. They're expanding to other states. And there's so many times in my career that I've been told that, Vivian, MedZef helped us. MedZef helped us get to where we are going because of the transparency and the assistance in the financing of medications. Because you have to think that medication purchases are, one of the largest costs. That's what they're spending their money on, right, in the hospital. It's one of their largest profit centers, right? So we're actually creating this framework to help them reduce their, increase their profit, but also reduce the medication prices overall, and get rid of a lot of the murkiness or darkness around procuring of medications. Now we went from 10 hospitals in 2017. We're executing a contract for 3,000 hospitals across Nigeria right now. We're going into other countries next year. So we've really grown a lot, but the financing piece was a key piece that we had to tackle from the very, very beginning in order to get where we are here today. And I think that the benefit of making sure that healthcare stakeholders have access to working capital is the improvement of the quality of medications that they purchase. And that I can 100% say is the impact of financing, giving access to working capital to hospitals and clinics. They purchase better medications. They purchase in advance so that they can purchase in bulk and get better pricing on their medications. And that results in patients actually getting better quality medications at the point of care. So it's super crucial to discuss.
Nice to know. We're gonna go into questions and answers shortly, but I see none on the chat. So I'm gonna add a couple of questions that I have here. Derek, if you can talk about the relationship between the public sector and the private sector, how can they collaborate to better push digital health? What can they do?
Thanks a lot. Betty. In fact, I was gonna add one more story before I address the question. So maybe.
Okay, you have time, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I wanted to share, and really leveraging the points that Vivian was talking about here, technology needs to really put people's perspective right in front. This is really one of the principles we've been promoting, putting people first, and aligns with the principles of digital development. Align with the users and make sure that we are tackling users' needs. One of the challenges we had, as I alluded to, in deploying digital modalities of work in the health sector is a lack of trust. And more often than not, we saw patients feeling as if when the doctor is typing, you're delaying me and you might as well just scribble so I could, go away. And when we try to introduce telemedicine programs in certain communities, the issue of trust, why is the physician, they would ask, consulting somebody else? I mean, is he less qualified? Should we not be going to the person he's talking to instead? But what we've seen in countries after COVID is that because the disruption, as Vivian mentioned, has occurred, countries like Ghana have been able to demonstrate that the adoption of mobile telephony for purposes of consulting a physician really went up. They were able to prevent unnecessary hospital visits by means of triaging patients. And in countries like Rwanda, chatbots are used quite effectively in terms of making sure that the triage of patients is actually maintained. So we see more and more use cases that are connecting people better, especially because of the mobile connectivity that we have in large access in the African continent. And this takes me to sort of like graduate towards this PP arrangement, the private sector collaboration. As an organization, we have leveraged the International Telecommunications Union to really strengthen the engagement of the private sector. And one of the issues, or at least advantages that we need to leverage from the private sector is really to orchestrate this innovative approach towards health service delivery. The private sector has an extremely important role in terms of ideating innovative approaches, research and development, and also where possible, really, as staging themselves as a platform to advocate new ideas. Because without the private sector, it's really hard for the industry to develop. And most of the digital solutions that we talk about today actually come from the private sector. And so it's extremely important to ensure that we're especially promoting local institutions and making sure that we're promoting upcoming industries, incubation banks, and so forth, because they're the future of sustainability moving forward. And especially because with digitalization, African countries are able to stand shoulder to shoulder, because it's mostly mental exercise at the beginning, especially when it comes to writing medical records, for example. We have a lot of open source solutions, and all it takes is applying one's ingenuity to transform the open source platforms into a digital solution that provides a particular service. We've seen some interesting examples in Kenya, for example, with the M-Pesa program, where they've been able to work with mobile companies, this is the private sector, to ensure that they're able to pay for services using mobile phones. And that has created opportunities around financial inclusions. The unbanked populations that are not able to have bank accounts, are able to at least use the mobile credit to pay for services. And so this is the kind of innovation that we expect the private sector to provide, so that we're able to better provide the needed care, especially to the marginalized populations. Those are the comments I have here, Betty, and thanks, and back to you.
Thanks. I'm going to give the last 2 minutes to Joshua. You've all told us stories. I think that's great, and I think it's really important. Let's give him a chance before we close. Thank you.
Sure. So a story I want to tell you about is a young startup out of Kenya called Wazi. Wazi is developing a marketplace to connect coaches, therapists, psychologists with individuals to do therapy. Initially, anonymously, via Telegram and WhatsApp, and then over time being able to do video therapy. The interesting thing about Wazi, it's not a B2C platform. As an individual, you can't necessarily buy a token to be able to see a therapist. It's actually targeted towards employers, because employers are understanding more and more that as if their workforce is able to be more mentally well, then the productivity level, their lack of absenteeism or lack of presenteeism. So when somebody shows up to work and isn't able to really do their work because of everything else that's happening in life, when that's reduced, then their overall value creation is much greater. And so it's exciting to see that also smaller, medium-sized organizations, as well as large corporations, are playing a bigger role in ensuring that the workforce, that the workforce essentially is able to be more well. That's my story. Thank you.
So I, as the person who's the CEO of an organization, can say, I'm going to buy time, and anyone in my office, doesn't matter who it is, I'm not going to know. They call up and they address a problem that they may be facing.
Wow. And in speaking with a number of the organizations, of the companies who have purchased this service, they see automatically this a levity that comes where people aren't feeling so weighted down with their day-to-day worries and issues and fears and anxieties. And there's actually an increase in employees being able to talk and open up a little bit more to one another about what's really happening behind the curtain.
That's fantastic. Okay, so this is really exciting for me. You know, there are many things I didn't know that I've learned today from all of you. You make a difference. Each and every one of you makes a difference in our world. And so I want to thank you all very much. And I'm going to pass this back on to Judah now to continue with the next panel. Thank you for your time. Thanks for making a difference.
Betty, thank you very much. And thank you likewise to the excellent panelists for sharing your perspectives. That was very, very interesting. And I join Betty in thanking you for making a difference. Before, I want to give a chance before the next panel to Selena from FSD MAC to say a few words. Before we do that, I just want to remind those who are in attendance that there is an opportunity to enter your questions or your comments, and you can direct them in any specific panelist through the chat box, and we'll attend to those during or towards the end of the next session. So Selena, over to you, please.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay. I'm having here some tech problems. Thank you, Jordan, and thanks, Betty, and the first panel. As FSD Mozambique, we are glad here to be in this second webinar that we're organizing together with Mondato and FSD Zambia. We planned last year to have a presential conference, but unfortunately, due to the COVID, we were forced to not to have it in the presential way, but we have decided to have this webinar time to time, hoping that next year we will be able to have a presential conference in Mozambique if the things are moving. I just want to say a word regarding the last panel. The issue of alternative fund, the issue of working capital, I think is very crucial. Really, from my perspective, I was never thinking in the value channel for health. And Viviane, your example has opened us also the mind that you usually think on the agriculture side and the other value channel, and we never think on health. And this example that you have explained to us really is going to be part of our exercise, and we're going to see how financial inclusion can also contribute to the health. So thank you very much, and I wish a continuation of good conference, and hoping to see you in a presential conference sometimes next year if COVID allow us. Thank you. Jordan, to you.
Okay, Selena, thank you very much for your comments. And also, I think it is a very interesting observation about the impact of working capital in areas that we may not always anticipate, particularly in health delivery. And I also joined you in hoping that we're able to gather together next year in Maputo. That would be wonderful. So for the next panel, we have 4 participants, and just before introducing them or giving them an opportunity to introduce themselves, allow me to say a few brief words about it. Clearly, over the past, it's hard to keep track now. Over the past, I guess it's getting close to 18 months, we've seen quite a transformation across many African markets due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And when this all started, there were various predictions of what would be sort of the fallout and the impact on financial inclusion and the development of alternative models and other areas that affect those parts of the economy. For example, the adoption of broadband infrastructure and services. And it's been the previous session, it was noted that almost the old adage, don't let a crisis go wasted. It's been observed that some of the impact of the pandemic period has been an increased adoption in terms of pace and in terms of expansion of various digital services. And we pay witness to it by the fact that we're on this session today, other sessions like it, that some of these things have become ingrained. And so one of the continuing themes of these webinars is the so-called new normal. Right? And what does new normal mean? What does new normal look like? Well, I'm not sure anyone can answer that question at this point yet with 100% certainty. But what we can say and we can observe is that whatever this normal is like, it certainly is going to be different from what existed before the pandemic. And whereas there might have been in the early days, maybe the first several months of this pandemic, sort of this expectation that we would go back to the way the world was with maybe some sort of minor adjustments, it now seems that we're never going back to that. And as different, different sectors in different contexts debate what should be their long-term approach and their long-term normal, for example, in the workplace, hybrid models versus a complete return to office base, and in other sectors as well. What we're clearly seeing is this sort of machination and effort to try and establish ways that are going to persist going forward. Now, in the specific area that we're discussing today, we're looking at payments, we're looking at banking, we're looking at other parts of the financial sector. We're trying to understand what has been the temporary and ongoing long-lasting impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the adoption of financial services, on the types of new products that we're seeing out there, whether loan products, savings products, insurance products, what have you. And we're trying to also understand on a market basis and on a consumer basis what is going to be this effect longer term. And that's really we're going to hone in on the next session. And I will just mention one last thing, which it's interesting to see if there was concern that mobile money and alternative digital financial services were going to sort of stall in Africa. We actually haven't seen that happen. We've seen very healthy growth in Africa in 2020. You could look at the recent GSMA statistics that came out on mobile money growth on the continent, and it's perhaps surprising, certainly heartening to see that Africa by far still leads every other region in the world when it comes to mobile money accounts, when it comes to mobile money transactions, when it comes just pushing ahead with inclusion statistics, albeit starting from a low base. But the pandemic did not slow down this effort on a long-term basis. It may not be as fast as the growth was before, but overall, the growth has been significant. And this, by the way, while some of the enablers like sort of the universal access on broadband is still not where it needs to be. So interestingly enough, we're seeing that there are ways and there are innovations that have allowed for financial inclusion to continue to persist and take hold, and even all sorts of funding into new deals and transactions. Some big investments into fintech in digital finance in Africa over the past year plus. So we're seeing really innovation take place on the continent. And I'm delighted to have some of the leaders in this space with us for this session right now. And what I'm going to ask, I'm just going to mention the names. We have Yaku Fori from Mambu. We have Levin Rampersad from Time Bank. We have Sandra Hua Yao from Tunes. And we have Olivia, who is joining us from M-Pesa. So I'm going to ask each of Olivia Etiang, joining us from M-Pesa. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, starting please with Olivia, if you will. I'd kindly, to all our panelists, kindly turn on your video if your bandwidth will support it. I see Levin has it on. I'm not seeing the rest yet.
Thank you so much, Judah, for this, and it's really a privilege to be here with you today. My name is Olivia Etiang. I work for Safaricom and specifically M-Pesa. I have worked for M-Pesa for the last 7 years and been able to do credit products, remittances, and now payments. And it's really an interesting space, and I'm happy to be discussing some of the insights with you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Olivia. And Sandra, please, over to you.
Thank you, Judah. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for having us. And to my panelists, my name is Sandra. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. Have been working with Transfer2/Tunes for the last 5 years. So we do cross-border payments, connecting every institution who wants to send money cross-border. Very happy to be part of this discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Sandra. And Yaku, if we can go over to you, please.
Thank you, Judah. So I'm Yaku Furi. I'm the Managing Director for Africa at Mambu. I've got about 20 plus years banking financial industry experience, of which the last 15 years is focused on fintech and the African continent, driving various solutions there. Mambu is the world's only true SaaS cloud banking platform. We were launched in 2011, and we fast-tracked the design and the build of nearly any type of offering for banks of all sizes, lenders, fintechs, retailers, telcos, and more. Our unique composable approach means that we can meet any business need for their end user demands. We've got about 700 employees worldwide, and we support more than 200 customers in 65 countries, of which Time Bank, Oak North, N26, Standard Bank, and Orange Mobile are listed under the group.
Fantastic. And last but certainly not least, Levin, please, over to you.
Thank you, Judah, and hello to the panelists. My name is Levin Rampersad. I'm from Time Bank. Like Yaku, I've got plus minus about 20 years banking experience. The past 4 years, however, has been the best for me because we've managed to open up a bank from scratch, which is called Time Bank. 2018, it was launched. I'm the product owner of the core banking system, of which Yaku did mention that we use Mambu as our core banking platform. We are a full digital bank, which is cloud-based, which is the first in SA. And we are up to 3.8 million customers since 2018 once we launched. So the bank itself is doing phenomenal things for our customers here in South Africa. And we're trying to see how can we take this across the world.
Levan, thank you for that. So let's start with that. Those last two comments. Last 4 years, I believe you said, were the most exciting for you. You've been in the industry for 20 years, and all of our colleagues here have been in the industry for quite some time. I sometimes marvel when people say, "When did you start doing this?" And it sort of, I'm like, my goodness, so many years have passed, and how quickly they have. But that notwithstanding, certainly it's a super exciting time. Oddly enough. Because, and one almost feels guilty because there's, this started and continues to be evidenced by so much sadness in this period and so much difficulty. And yet, one has to acknowledge that within digital finance, some incredible things are taking place. And I'm going to ask all of you in a different way about this. From the different angles, but you say the last several years have been very, very exciting, and we hear all about digital banking, right, being part of this, and digital this, digital that. And for those who are attending who may be too shy to ask, well, what is it? What is digital banking? Well, how do we think about digital banking? And after that, I'm going to want to hear from Jakob a little bit about cloud, this famous cloud. We may all think we know it, but break it down for us if you don't mind.
Thanks, Judah. So the misconception currently about digital banking is I load an app on my phone and I'm allowed to basically bank. That's what people, or the public, should I say, actually understands what digital banking is. However, digital banking goes way beyond that. Digital banking goes with your backend systems. If you've got legacy systems and you're trying to do digital banking is something which is fast-paced. You must be able to get into the market quite quickly, but that also counts on your infrastructure that you do have. Now, when you look at basic banks, and if I talk from South Africa, we've got the big four banks. And yes, they're phenomenal in what they do. I mean, I wouldn't put them past them because they've been here for ages. But if you look at first to market, should I say, on products or innovation from their side, it's normally an app, but there's too many manual things that goes wrong, of which manually that company has to deal with. If you look at Time Bank itself, we basically gone digitization with all of our systems. So when you look at automation is one of your biggest things when it comes to digitization. You must be able to be fast to respond. You don't want to patch and plaster your systems. You want to fix your systems. We are allowed to do that compared to the other banks. If you look at from our product perspective, we can go out with products because of our systems that allow us. Generally, the conservative banks, if you look at them, they go anywhere between 18 and 24 months with a new product. Whereas Time Bank within maybe 3 months, inclusive of marketing, we can come up with a new product. And if you look at Time Bank right now on social media, you'd find that in the past year, we went up to about 3 or 4 new products in 1 year. That's unheard of in banking, especially in the South African market. So that's the perception that people, I think, has got, is just that we've got banking apps and that's how we are digital. So, that's for me the biggest thing. And, one would say that, yeah, but all that is fair and well, but an app also is digital. Well, that's just the means to actually getting your stuff done. I mean, if you look at Time Bank, what would we do? We basically went and revolutionized banking in the sense of you don't need a ID document. You don't need to physically sit in front of a consultant at a bank in an area. You basically got a kiosk in a pick and pay store where all that you need is your ID and your cell phone number, and you can open up a bank account inclusive of getting your card with your name printed on it in under 5 minutes. Now that's taking banking to a different height from a South African perspective. And I mean, also regulatory wise, we had to go through, South Africa is very, very heavily regulated when it comes to banking. One understands that you have to cross quite a lot of hurdles. Time Bank, we've done all of those things. So just in a nutshell, that's basically what I can actually tell you, Judah.
Okay, so it sounds like it's not just about a fancy front end. You also have to deal with the stack in the back. It sounds like there's some regulatory hurdles you need to jump through, and also really sort out the distribution strategy. And I imagine that must be additionally challenging at a time when people can't leave their houses for significant periods of time. So figure out how to accommodate those challenges. And Jaco, if you can, I know I've heard this term composable banking, and Leven has mentioned the importance of the stack, but what are those, is digital banking, given some of these requirements, really for the newcomers, the neobanks, the new entrants, or is there room for legacy players to also participate in this space? And how do they deal with some of these challenges?
Well, yeah, definitely. It's not only for new. Oops, am I on mute? Okay, so definitely it's not only for newcomers. I mean, if your old legacy banks, if they do not evolve and digitally transform, they'll be left behind and won't be able to compete anymore in the market, especially with all the neobanks and fintechs that's popping up everywhere. Which in Africa, there's huge funding for these guys to bring to market specific use case needs, and it's quick and easy to set up. So if the bigger banks does not evolve, obviously they would be left behind. But if you look at a core banking transformation, obviously, that's something that's a huge risk for a bank. And obviously the large players, most of those people would have probably gone through a big upgrade of a core banking solution, or maybe going over to a different core solution in their lifetime. And, it makes them scared, and they understand the big risks around that. But what we have been seeing, it's not a full transformation that's really taking place. There's these, what they call like a speedboat. So the bigger banks are looking at a venture division. It's a full, complete spin-off, where they either share some of the legacy back-end solutions of the bank, but they essentially stand on their own. They've got their own banking charter, or and launching new products, testing that in the water. And once they've achieved that, they look at their bigger strategy for digital transformation. Is cloud the way to go? Taking now a Mambu perspective for digitalization, but is the cloud the right way for them to go? Do they move with us on that journey? But it gets them thinking about that, and it takes all the constraints away from your internal processes if you can do that through a speedboat. So we've been really seeing that speedboat and spin-off route most prevalent in the global market as well, because that's the quickest way to get to revenue and then to test the new technologies. So there's definitely various ways to do it, rather than just a rip and replace of your core banking solution. So we talk a lot about rather digital modernization than a digital transformation.
Yeah, modernization is certainly a less intimidating word for many, myself included. And certainly if you're a legacy institution, it might be a more palatable way to start going about some of the changes, which no doubt are necessary. And Olivia, I know that you're focused on universal payments, and this term payments, we talk about banking, and banking really, it covers the gamut, and banks do many, many different types of things. And obviously, payments are a more specific offering. In Africa, much of the initial sort of movement in payments was person-to-person, P2P type activity. And over the years, and you certainly within M-Pesa have participated and helped lead this charge of payments across the entire ecosystem, right? And then expanding into other service categories as well. Can you help us contextualize, what has occurred in the payment space and the sort of drive within your remit towards a more universal adoption and sort of facilitation, and what's transformed or changed, if anything, during the pandemic? And we know that the regulators, I see a question about regulation. I know it's coming more from my banking side, but we'll get to that in a moment. But the regulators were really keen to reduce barriers to transactions, and there was sort of a soft agreement for a period of time to waive certain types of fees. Give us a sense of what's changed and where you see the landscape evolving.
Thank you, Judah, again. Really, we have seen a lot of acceleration of adoption of digital channels, payment channels. We have seen growth in very specific verticals, such as e-commerce. So there's been a great adoption of e-commerce, double-digit growth in this country, and customers continue to use e-commerce both for domestic and international payments. We have seen this space shift so much, in the sense that the regulator also came in to waive certain transactions, especially during the COVID pandemic period at the onset. And with this, definitely there was a lot of adoption of using a digital channel to make payments to our merchants. So even the merchants themselves have adopted, have increased acceptance of these digital channels. We have also seen that because of that, there's now a lot more reliance on digital payments, as opposed to moving and having cash, and then that means that actually we are driving the adoption of and acceleration of such channels in our market. Now, what again we have seen in this market is that customers are actually demanding good experience, good consumer experience. So there's been really sort of a rush or multiple priorities for us to develop products for customers and provide a very good experience. So what we've done, or what we are doing recently, is we provide customers with a single super app where they're able to access multiple products, just to change the experience and offer them a super experience, and also adopt digital, not just digital, but obviously looking at more global trends such as biometric. You can use Face ID to authenticate and authorize transactions, and we're seeing a lot of adoption of those. We launched an app, is it 3 months ago, and we've seen great uptake of that service. So yes, back to your question, I think there's been great acceleration of use of digital channels, and also as an organization, you can't do everything. So we've worked with various brands and partnerships to deliver for the customer and give them a good experience, as well as give them a wide range of value propositions in the payment space. Back to you, Judah.
Yeah, Olivia, thank you so much. That's very interesting. And you talk about the lower fees early in the pandemic. You talk about partnerships. You talk about a good customer experience, and you talk about the super app, which seems to be picking up pace in many countries outside of China, even as China starts changing its approach in the financial space and trying to separate some of the activities. Sandra, I want to turn to you, if I may. Olivia talked about removing barriers, right? And trying to create a more friendly consumer and merchant experience. And I wonder if, from your perspective and Toon's perspective, what are other sort of barriers for adoption? And we talk about affordability, we talk about interoperability. What else needs to be done? What are you seeing in the market? In general, what are you guys trying to sort of progress? And if you could hone in a little bit on the pandemic period for us.
Thanks for the question. I think in the last 18 months, during this very unfortunate period, we've seen our traffic increase by threefold. And this is largely driven because of the restriction of people's movement, right? Migrants are not able to go back home for a long period of time, myself included. I have not been to China for 18 months now to see my parents. But digital payments have really helped. I think at the early stage of the pandemic, the World Bank have predicted the remittance will drop. And I think we have all seen that the remittance have actually increased. This also contributes to our own growth, right? By removing barriers, we talk about the whole interoperability. How do we make sure people can send money as easy as possible, at a better rate as possible? With this entire AFTA agreement in the region, right? We are trying to create a whole one market instead of 54 different markets. We want to make sure people can send money anytime and anywhere. And that's why our partnership with the likes of M-Pesa and our banking partners to allow. We recently just launched with our one of our key customer, Vodacom Tanzania. They can now, their consumers can now go to their app or go to their phone and send money to any bank accounts in Kenya and Rwanda. And this is facilitated by us, and it's real time. I think this is the first time that can happen. You can send money across a country, across a channel, across a different payment scheme, and you can settle your money in real time. We have also launched with our partner bank, FDH in Malawi. Now you can go to FDH Malawi Bank and send money to any mobile number wallets in Tanzania in real time. All this, we have seen the acceleration during this pandemic period. We have increased our intra-Africa corridor from 20 to 80 plus, and we still have about 200 corridors in the pipe, because we see that talking about payments, what Olivia earlier mentioned, we are also working on with most of our wallet provider. Today, imagine you take your M-Pesa Kenyan wallet and you go to Ghana and you buy coffee for Judah and you want to check out at MT Momo Pay merchants, and we want to facilitate that. You don't have to make sure you have a bank account or a card for you to travel globally, I mean, going beyond Africa. So I think what else needs to be done, I think there's a lot of the central banks have come into this space to help players like us. How do we remove the friction, and in terms of policy making, how do we make sure that we can also look at, now we have the AFTA, in place. How do we make sure that the financial policies align with the same agenda and priority to make sure that we can move the economy together and remove all these barriers? I think that would be key in this space.
Yeah, absolutely, Sandra. It sounds like you guys have been super active in facilitating a lot of sort of removal of these barriers and taking opportunity of wherever the regulators are creating space for innovation and for interoperability and for new relationships and for real-time movement of money. And as you mentioned, addressing friction is a big prerogative. And Leven, we're asked by Chiori Zukula, MD of Mozambique Business Angel Network. What can we learn from your experience engaging with regulators? And just for other participants on the call, for a little bit of context, South Africa is well known for having a very structured in a very let's say risk-averse regulatory environment, whereas maybe in the past, and I'm going in the past again, how many years we've been around in this industry, I'm going pre-2008. There was sometimes criticism of the South African regulators, SARB, saying that they're too monolith, too slow, and then you had the financial crisis of 2008 in the West, and the contagion was caught across many markets, but in a sense, the regulatory structure and the conservative approach of the regulators in South Africa protected South Africa from getting this contagion in a bad way. And I think sort of some of that pressure to change abated after that. And in now this new period of transformation, whether it's evolution or sort of more wholesale transformation and movement into the digital space, again, we're looking at regulation. And so the question from Mozambique is, you're trying to create a new bank, you're trying to get a license. What did you learn in that process of engaging with the regulator specifically? And if you can actually draw out some wider observations about regulation, how do we find that right balance, right? Removing the friction, trying to let innovation move as fast as it can, but also maintain some control and structure to make sure we protect consumers and businesses and so forth.
Thanks, Judah. That is quite an open-ended question. When you talk regulatory, I can talk for days on it. But to the caller from Mozambique, what I can tell you is our biggest challenge was that we wanted to go cloud-based banking. And that was never been done in South Africa. All four banks that we've got, the big four banks, all of their servers are housed here in South Africa. Cloud-based banking, and because we are with Mambu, it's based in Ireland. So the biggest hurdle that we needed to actually foresee was data. POPIA has just came out right now. That's the act where it governs all information with customer. How do you actually govern that when all your data is sitting in Ireland? That was one of the questions that came through from the SARB, which is the South African Reserve Bank. All we did was we said, okay, if that is the case, if anything has to happen, we just needed to store a local DB, which is of all of our customer data. And the SARB was happy with that. So we basically did go through, to Judah's point, South Africa is heavily regulated. There is GN6, Section 13, and I can go on with all these sections. But when you need a banking license, the first thing that they would ask you is, when your system is operational, how are you going to make sure that the customer's money that they are putting with you is not going to be used in any harmful way, and the bank takes full liability of that money. So with us, we've got integrated systems. We've got a payment industry that needed to show that a transaction can go through, which is files that's coming through. Getting a little bit technical, we've got a bit of bank serve. That's basically our intermediary who basically hands over files between the banks for interoperability. And then you've got the closed loop system where you basically transfer money inside the bank with your own customers. So to the caller from Mozambique, the challenges for us was mostly digital in the sense of cloud-based banking. Other than that, we had to follow all the normal regulations as per the South African regulator. The cloud-based banking was taken with open arms, I must say, because South Africa is looking at how do we take banking to the next level. And everybody here in South Africa knows that digitization, and to Jaco's point, modernization, however those terms are used, I'm not too sure, but everybody's got their own little meaning for that. But digitization, modernization is something that is now the new age. How do you get there? Time Bank is basically the first player to say it is possible. Now we're going to look at how many more other entrants in the market in SA is going to try and do that, or across the African continent. I hope I answered the question.
You certainly did. You certainly did. And your question, also your response, allows us to segue to another question that we have from Harold in Australia. He's asking, is digital banking for the unbanked? Is mobile money digital banking? All banks have digital infrastructure, surely, exclamation point question. And if I can try and sort of hone in, one of the big reasons that regulators have been open to embracing cloud, digital banking, alternative neobanking, come up with your terminology, but in general there's been openness, is because this issue of really this stubborn metric of not being able, and every country defines it differently, but trying to get to a more universal approach to financial inclusion. How do we make sure that more people can avail themselves of financial services? And the traditional mode of doing it basically would peak. You'd sort of hit a ceiling of how far you could go as you sort of moved into certain strata in society. And that peak, whatever it was in the different countries, was just not acceptable. And in the interest of trying to move things forward, there's been generally observed more openness on the part of regulators across the continent, but also certainly on the heels of COVID-19, where Olivia mentioned there was this effort to try and remove the pricing friction on transactions and just try and create more paths for people to have an entry point and a sustainable entry point into financial services. So to the question coming in from Australia, Yaku, Leven mentioned, for example, data sovereignty considerations and other sort of challenges. Is digital banking a way of addressing financial inclusion? Mobile money is sort of another path, right? And sometimes people, debate what exactly, we said at the beginning, what is digital banking? Is mobile banking digital banking for all intents and purposes? A little bit different maybe from an e-wallet, but is it acceptable? What are the different lanes, and how do we think of it in terms of regulation and the opportunity for additional financial inclusion?
Oh, okay, a loaded question there, but if you look at digital banking or mobile banking, obviously the key thing there is how do you, and where it basically all started is, how do you get financial services to the people of the mass market where they are in very outlying areas, and do not necessarily have branch support in those areas to get to those customers. And if I can relate it to Levin, where he said digital banking is not only the mobile phone, right? It's the whole ecosystem around that. So it's how do you onboard those customers that are far away and that don't have access to those financial services. So that's the biggest thing, the onboarding part first. Obviously, there would be some regulatory requirements around that. Each country, as you mentioned, have got some data sovereignty and where you can host the data, but there are ways around that, and we've successfully managed to give solutions for regulators, what they are happy with, to come around that. Obviously, being fully secured and all that, but tokenizing the customer data rather than sending the physical customer data to the cloud, stuff like that. So yes, mobile banking, I don't think it's only for getting the unbanked or previously unbanked market base for banking. There's a lot of other benefits around digital banking. I mean, if you look at the Generation Z, Y, wherever we are at the moment, those kids are constantly on their phone, and for them it's where it's speaking to their need and what is quick and easy for them. They don't want to sit in a bank branch like we did when we opened our first accounts. They want to do it on the mobile, and they want to do it quick and easy. So mobile banking is a lot bigger, and it's where you want to focus and which customer segment you want to attract. Yes, it's a way to get inclusive banking for all the previously unbanked. Definitely the cheapest channel to do that, various ways that you can do that in, but it's also speaking to your generation, the latest generation that just wants everything at the flick of a button, and they want it quick and they want new stuff the whole time. So the banks need to be able to adapt to that, and the technology stack should be able to accommodate for that adaptability and the change. So yeah, I think that should about cover everything.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks, Yaku. So in a way, you're saying, as we transform the model more broadly, it just naturally becomes less frictive and more accessible to more types of customers. So it's not about trying to facilitate special services or special channels necessarily for the less included, but if you facilitate a more friendly and more accessible service overall, it'll enable a wider swath of the market to participate, which is a very interesting perspective. And Olivia, since you're sitting in a different market, you have purview certainly in East Africa as well, and M-Pesa, I mean, do we think of mobile money as digital banking? Is that a proper label for M-Pesa? Would you accept that, or would you sort of condition that response differently?
Sorry, I think I'll agree a lot with what Yako has said, that what mobile banking is doing today is, what M-Pesa is doing today is exactly what mobile banking has been doing for a long time, and digital banking. So there's a little bit of digital banking and more in providing more accessibility of services, accessibility of products to the customers, accessibility of value propositions. But in a large sense, yes, it is digital banking, because this access is provided on a mobile phone, and it is reachable. I mean, you can reach these services anywhere, from wherever you would want to or wish to transact. So definitely, and not just limited to banking. We are now seeing, like I did mention before, that customers are actually demanding for more, more than just banking. I want to bank, but I also want you to look at I want a personalized experience. I want you to give me a personalized experience. So what other products can I layer on onto this, mobile banking, mobile money, to be able to, enable you to create some stickiness on using your channel and your wallet. Yeah, so there's digital banking in that, and definitely looking at, how do we enhance the scope of what we are offering within this space, and not just limited to payments, and looking more at contextualizing the payments to what exactly a customer would be looking at. Judah, if you give me a minute, I would also want to just chip in on the regulatory challenges, because I noted my fellow panelists were speaking on regulatory challenges. I wanted to just mention that indeed in this market we have seen quite a few challenges with the regulatory environment, especially so there has been increased scrutiny. There's increased scrutiny, especially on the new providers. And because of digitization of everything today, there's quite a number of fintechs that have come up in this market, especially in the payment space. So there's a lot of new guidelines, new stuff, a lot of stress on data protection, consumer. Not that we were not doing this before, but there's a lot of scrutiny, more scrutiny from the regulator. And because technology is really moving fast, there's also been a lot of delay. So there's a lot of, the regulator is not catching up as fast as we wish that they do. So I just did want to make that comment to affirm that, yes, indeed, there are regulatory challenges in this market as well. Thank you.
That's a great point, Olivia. I mean, pity the regulator, if we may, for a moment. How in the world are they to keep up with the incredible pace of innovation and investment? And Sandra, maybe you offer us some thoughts on this. In the payment space, it definitely, as Olivia noted, there just seems to be so much investment pouring in and so many new players. How do we reconcile everything that's happening there? Some of the regulatory let's say evolution that we're seeing, again, playing around with the terminology a little bit, but we're seeing evolution in the Chinese market happening right now, and some of the neighboring markets in East Asia as well.
Yeah.
How do
for the project plan?
Betty, if you can go on mute, we're hearing you in the background. How do you see this wave of investment into payments and all these new players? Some of these sort of regulatory sort of new waves of thinking around regulation in the space that are emerging in other markets, will they come to Africa as well? And again, this general mission of removing friction and trying to, and I was really interested, you said, you had 3 times the traffic during the pandemic, at least the early pandemic, while folks were basically being asked to stay at home and there was like limits on travel. So how do you see that playing out going forward? Again, with sort of like this regulatory sort of effort to keep up on the one hand and keep adjusting and pivoting, all these new players coming in, and this need to keep removing friction. How do we get to that optimization?
Great question. I think it's like the $1 million question, right? As we all know, technology innovation are happening much, much faster. And obviously central banks are trying to play the catch up. I think a lot of the central banks, I must also have to comment on them that they are doing a great job, right? They are trying to keep up. When pandemic happens, it's the central banks in different countries promoting reduced pricing for remittance. And of course, a lot of our partners are also contributing to this, ourselves included. Regulation is a must, I must say, especially in this payment industry, which is $1 trillion industry. Without regulation, without due diligence and compliance necessary to ensure we safeguard these consumers' interest, it's a very hard balance for us, for regulators to play. And yes, indeed, there's a lot of money pouring in because cross-border payments is a very, very large space. When we move from C2C to B2B, we're looking at very big ticket size and facilitating trade crossing border, which is a very hard, how do I say, it's a very hard process to regulate. I don't think we have the solution, or rather the one solution. What we can do is that all the players in this space, we need to continue engage with regulators and make sure that we play within the rules and the guidance, make sure that we are not putting, or rather bringing danger or risk into the system. Because after all, when we talk about money, customer protection is very, very important. How do we make sure that people's money is safe as we move them across border? And so I think we just have to keep this engagement going, and we all need to remain open-minded, working with our regulators, making sure that we follow the guideline. And I'm sure they all have this departments looking at the new things coming up. I mean, Ghana, Nigeria have come up with the e-currency, that's their piloting. And we are all, watching out and see how we can participate and bring more, alignment into the payment industry.
That's very insightful, and that's a great summary, Sandra. And you mentioned e-currencies, and in our brief 90 minutes, we haven't even gone there. We haven't gone crypto, we haven't gone E. I think we'll have to save that one for the next session, but certainly that's a whole other kettle of fish. A super fascinating topic. Everyone's trying to navigate. Every regulator is trying to figure out whether they should launch their own, or whether they should block everybody else, how we should play in that sandbox. So looking forward to digging into that in a future session. We have 1 minute. I actually was hoping to quickly go around and ask everybody sort of their aspirations and brief for the future and where they see things going. I think we're going to have to save that for next time because we are quite tight on time. So I want to first of all thank all 4 panelists in this session. This has been fantastic and super interesting discussion, and we've only begun to scratch the surface. But the comments that have been made and the observations, super insightful, and help us sort of frame and guide our thinking towards the future as we continue down this path. Hopefully we're getting towards the end of the tunnel of COVID-19, whatever this normal evolves and looks like in the future. We certainly know it's going to look different, and some aspects of the change have moved us forward in terms of digitization across the continent, a bevy of new services, additional customers have an opportunity to partake in this space. certainly in the consumer level and also in the small business level. Also, I think the observation all of you made, which is maybe in the past, it was sort of a more adversarial relationship between regulators and those who are regulators. And now we're much more on the same side of the table, trying to figure out how do we navigate together as all of this innovation and all of this investment and all of this public interest coincides to try and move the industry forward. I also want to thank the panelists from last session and Betty for a very interesting discussion. We learned a lot about that. Now, for those of you who attended and participated and maybe had a hard time sort of following everything that we went through and would love a summary of that, good news, you will be receiving a Mondato insight. Those come out every couple of weeks or weekly from Mondato. One of the editors is actually listening in on this session and will ably provide a summary and perspective, which will come into your mailbox next week. And a last word, again, this journey started on these webinars around March of last year when the pandemic hit and we weren't sort of sure how, it didn't get to Africa initially. We weren't sure what the impact was going to be. It's become a sort of an international crisis, a global situation, and we've been in this mode for a while. We certainly are hopeful that in 2022 we'll have the opportunity to convene together while we all enjoy and benefit tremendously from the opportunity to get together digitally. And I always marvel at the fact that we can all be on other sides of the world and it looks like we're together. It's amazing. I think we'll all probably agree that there is still something to be said to humans getting together in a single room, live and in person. So we're going to try that one of these days. And we hope that when we do get the opportunity to do that, you will all join us in Maputo. So again, thank you to Selena and to Betty. Thank you to all our wonderful panelists and for joining us today. If you have any additional questions or follow-up, feel free to let us know and we'll share them with the panelists. And we wish you all a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Judah. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.